The views and opinions expressed during this broadcast do not necessarily reflect the beliefs of this radio station, its management, or its sponsors. Listeners are urged to use their own discernment to draw their own conclusions.
Welcome back into Rise and Shine Mornings. This the Rise and Shine Morning Show. I'm Ryan O'Neill.
I'm Andrah Palanis, and this is the Hour of Power. This is where we discover the mysteries of life hidden in the little details of the Bible. This is not your typical over-compelling religious discussion. I've got something really special that is very heart-touching, and hopefully it's going to change and transform your life. But before we get into it, I want Ryan to do his daily devotion.
Coming from Jesus Calling, enjoying peace in his presence. This is a 365 daily devotion by Sarah Young that you can get on Amazon.com. Get it today. All right, here we go. Psalms 8:5, Genesis 1:26 through 27, 2 Corinthians 10:5, and Isaiah 26:3, all together. Keep your focus on me, and big print. I have gifted you with an amazing freedom, including the ability to choose the focal point of your own mind. Only the crown of my creation has such a remarkable capability. This is a sign of being made in my image. Let the goal of this day be to bring every thought to me. Whenever your mind wanders, goes away, those thoughts that bring you away from me or anything else, bring them back to me. In my light, anxious thoughts shrink and shrivel away. Judgment thoughts are unmasked as you bask in my unconditional love. Confused ideas are untangled while you rest in the simplicity of my presence. I will guarantee you and keep you in a constant peace as your focus is on me. Woo! That's it.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm going to start out in Revelation chapter 12. We're going to talk about this woman who's standing in front of God's throne. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ. For the accusers of our brothers, who accuses them before God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows his time is short." When the devil saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to a place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman and sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman, and he went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus Christ. What we're going to be talking about is this whole, we have addressed so many different issues in our society by taking some of these little details in the Bible and, gleaning them and then making them applicable to what's going on around us. And we've done that with racism, the whole idea of supremacy. But we have another issue going on, and it's this war against the sexes, this male versus female thing. What I'm going to do is I'm really going to have to concentrate. So I'm going to have to ask Ryan to kind of back off today and hold any comments or distractions to the end, because this is very important. What I've got to say today is very important, extremely important, because what we have in these relationships and what's going on between this male and female thing is it's about dominance. And this is just from my perspective, and I'm going to share my personal experience, because when I met the Lord and I had my new birth experience, what mostly changed about me was my concept of God. My conceptualization of God was expanded at that moment. And when my conceptualization of God expanded, then my concept of myself also changed. Some things about myself didn't necessarily line up with God's word, had to diminish. There were some things about me that had to be diminished because they didn't look like Jesus. They didn't look like Jesus. They didn't look, it didn't line up with God. And then some things about myself had to be expanded or enhanced. And these were the things that, the elements of who I was that were made to look like God. Now, when this happened to me, so some things diminished and some things expanded through this new birth experience that I had with God. That although my conceptualization of God had been expanded and enhanced, and then my concept of myself, it was only in that time I actually discovered my true identity. And if you look all through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, you can see God changing people's identity. You can see him changing their names. The whole thing about changing, or Abram to Abraham, and Jacob to Israel, changing Saul to Paul, changing Simon to Peter. I mean, when you change a name, you change an identity. You're taking on a new identity. Because remember in Genesis, what was the whole point of Adam naming things? Adam named his wife, right? He called her Eve. So she received her identity from him. So whatever he called her, that's what she was. This was in Genesis, right? God made her while he was asleep. In other words, he didn't know anything about this. It was a total, he never saw this coming. Actually, he never really saw this coming. He just fell asleep and woke up one day, and bam, there she was. Now, God made her from a piece of his body. So she was a part of him. She was connected to him, okay? Because while he was asleep, God took a part of him and fashioned her and formed her like a sculpture. All God did was make her, put her there, and wake him up. That was it. When he saw her, he knew. He knew when he saw her that she was a part of him. He spoke her identity, and she became what he said. He said, "This is the bone of my bone. This is the flesh of my flesh." In other words, he knew. He was just saying, this is, whoa, this is mine, a custom-made Rolex. A watch that nobody else can wear but you. It won't fit anybody else but you. Nobody else can wear that watch. And, you know, that was such a beautiful moment. And guys, be careful. Men, be careful what you say. Be careful what you call your wife. Be careful what you say about her behind her back, or what you say to her face. Because you get what you say. Is that not what the Bible says? You get what you say. See, and here's another thing about expanding my conceptualization of God, expanded the conceptualization that I had of myself. And what happened was I realized not only was God expanded in my conceptualization of him, but his capabilities. I became more aware of his capabilities and his abilities and his involvement in my life and in my world. All of a sudden, I could see him everywhere. All of a sudden, I became aware of just what he could do. And it was like I didn't understand it before. But I also realized that I had capabilities and abilities that I didn't realize I had. And see, what happens when you meet God and your conceptualization of him changes?
And when your concept of God changes, the concept of yourself changes. See, whether we realize it or not, we all have some kind of a concept of God. And it doesn't really matter where you're from or what your gender is or what your religion is. There's something in you, according to Romans, that God puts in every one of us where we have some kind of concept of him. Now, whether that concept is the right concept or not, it's there. Once you focus on God to the point to where you become elevated, and sometimes that elevation puts you in a position to where you need protection. And a good example of that is Nehemiah. Nehemiah, the calling that God put on his life was an expanded vision. It was a vision of expansion. It was not a vision of reduction. And because it placed him in this elevated position, he had to fight in order to protect and maintain it. And you'll find, that as your concept of God expands, that the people around you, especially if their concept of God has been diminished by religion or their own selfishness and their own self-centeredness, their own desire to compromise. See, all of these things diminish the concept of God in our life. And when you have this expanded concept of God and you begin to express that concept of God, that becomes your ministry. Your ministry is your expression of God to the world around you. And sometimes your expression of God can challenge other people's concept of Him, because your life becomes a reflection of your concept of God. Think about it. If you are an atheist, your life is a reflection of your concept of God. You don't believe He exists. Therefore, your life reflects that, right? Due to technical difficulties, I've been unable to publish the rest of this message. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to redo it tomorrow. So stay tuned tomorrow. I promise I will redo this tomorrow. And due to time constraints, I'll have to just begin again tomorrow. Until then, bye.